Okay, yeah, I got.
Yes.
I got the pop-up. Yeah.
Great.
Okay. So everything is set.
Once again, hello everyone. Hello, Artur. Thanks for joining. Thanks for accepting our invitation. Welcome to our participants of our hackathon. We wish you a very good second day of the hackathon, and we start our session of lectures with a talk that will be given by Artur Roszczyk about accessibility in games. So Artur, the Zoom is yours.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I'm really glad that I can join your hackathon as a speaker and present something from myself. So my talk will be about accessibility in games, but seen from game designer perspective. Just something's not working. Okay, yeah. So right now I'm working in Orbital Night Games. This is a studio which is mostly focused on hyper-casual games, so games that are targeted for a massive audience. And this is why accessibility is so close to me, right? Because hyper-casual games have to have a great accessibility so that, you know, even no players, so people that don't really play can, you know, join your game and have fun. So I'm sorry, I have close to 15 years of experience already, and yeah, and I worked on. I can just share with you a couple of titles. I worked on Spire Blast. This is the game I worked in Orbital Night. And it's a huge success on Apple Arcade. You can check it out. This is the subscription model of Apple on App Store. I also work on Crazy Kick. This is a huge success as a hyper-casual game. It was published by Voodoo. Maybe you do know this game publisher because it's really a huge one. And the next one is Robonauts. It's much bigger title. Right now you can play it on Nintendo Switch. This is like a platformer game with fighting in center of the gameplay, and it's supposed to be really fast, dynamic gameplay, like in, you know, arcade-ish style. And the next one I can share, so just to show you my area of experience, you know, like that is quite a broad one, is Ancients AR, sorry, AR, and it's as the title suggests, it's a game for alternate reality on App Store, on Apple devices, and it's a strategy. But also with a focus in dynamic short span session, right? Because when you're using your phone as some kind of portal to alternate reality, you have to hold it and your hand gets tired and so on. So there can be like a long session. So it's a strategy that's focused on also a really fast gameplay.
Artur, sorry for interruption. There was a post from Santan, from one of our participants. Currently, we can see only the intro screen. I'm not sure if this is the intention, but
yes.
Okay, just, so this is fine. So there will be more slides later. Okay, that's fine.
Of course.
No worries. Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Let's go on.
So, and one other thing, if you have like any questions, I think there will be time on the end for them. I hope so. Yeah. So let's start. So I think these representations show well, like how you can look at games from higher perspective, right? From top view perspective. You can identify three core qualities: flow, juiciness, and accessibility. So, and they just, if you have some mechanics, some element in your game, it for sure it belongs to some of these qualities. And yeah, accessibility, we will learn about it during these talks. So right now I just leave it like this. Flow is this quality that makes player engaged in your game, right? So it's in this quality you can include game progression, level progression, difficulty balance, features of the game that you will add, some new enemies, and so on. And juiciness is more about visual feedback to your player, and also sounds, right, that player will hear, so that each action that the player will take in your game will be really rewarding for him, right? It will feel just awesome to do this in your game. So I think these three qualities show it. So yeah, I think that like the main function of game design is to provide a framework so that you will make informed decisions about game development, right? During developing of the game, you will for sure face some questions, challenges, problems, and that you have to somehow resolve to make the gameplay more fun, to solve some difficulty spike, and so on. And game design is a really great framework, so that each decision you will make won't be only based on some guess, because it's just a guess, right? It doesn't really it doesn't have to be true. And when you just analyze it from some from some angles using game design, you can make more informed decisions. So I think it's really, I think this is the main value, like the biggest value of game design in game development process. Yeah, and one of the perspectives we can use is accessibility, right? So I think you can look at game design from many angles, and one that I find really usable, and I find it usable more and more with the time that I work at games, is accessibility. Because if your games is you have a great accessibility, then you will have more players, and yeah, and you are more on the way to success. So yeah, let's imagine that that you're organizing a great party, but telling none of your guests how to get there, right? So we can already like see problems coming from that, right? That that our guests won't know our real address. Probably some of them will try to ask us, but this involves some action on their part, right? It's not just that they go to your party and at the end they just have to first ask for the address. And some of your guests, because of this problem, because of this difficulty, just won't join your party, because they will think that well, if they don't know the address, then they won't come, because it's too much hassle for them, right? So the same is with games. If you develop a great experience for the players, and you don't teach them anything about your controls, and they are not so easy to get. And most of the times when you think your controls are easy to get, they don't, they won't be so easy to play. So it's the same situation, right? You just from the start on, you will risk that a lot of players will just will just exit your game, will just fall out, right, from the experience. Then maybe it's really a great one, but without good accessibility, especially at the start, it's just a waste. process on your part. Yeah, so as I mentioned before, like accessibility is a way to get more players involved in your game. So it's always good to see it from that way. And yeah, and also if we filter our game design decisions like through these accessibility lenses, we will get easier to understand gameplay, because our core, which player will do the most in the game, will be simple for them to get into, right? It will be intuitive and so on. So if we have it, we can build upon that, right? It's much better to have a solid, simple foundation and then expand on it, than have, like a really cumbersome foundation, which is going to topple, which isn't, solid, which is really hard to get into, and try to somehow expand it even further. It's much more. It's a way just for some disaster, right? So it's better just to have this core as easy, as simple as you can get. And we also get more unified game world, because we try to simplify, right? If we want to have, if we work with accessibility, we simplify. And if we simplify, we have, no duplicates in the world. So for example, if I have, yeah, if I have some resource, for example, then, and for example, I have some, I don't know, gold, and I also want to have silver, then there is a question: why the player, should have silver and gold? Maybe it would be best to simplify and have one resource for which he can buy things, right? Because it serves the same function, and maybe it will be for the better. So it's always like this with looking at your game design from this perspective. And yeah, and each object in the game will have clear function or a character, right? The player really like will know, and it will be intuitive for him, because he will know, there won't be too many objects that he has to learn, right? So it will be simpler, less objects, as I said, and better immersion, because you also care about this, but you try to strive for as flawless experience for the player as you can get, right? There is some core experience that you want to share with your player, that you want, the player to be involved in, and you think about it, how to make it as flawless as possible without, showing some interruptions to the player because of some things. And I will show you examples of this that will make sense. So hyper casual games. So as I think about hyper casuals, I think about them as really an accessibility games, because they are made for masses. So, for example, when I started working on hyper casuals, before, I was working on bigger games, on some casual games which are bigger than hyper casual games, and yeah, and it's just different target. They are not so they don't have target that is so massive in scale. So so I was really astonished that games can work without any tutorial, right? And that in hyper casual games, you just have to make sure that the player from the start will know how to play your game, maybe by showing a simple hint, but for sure you can't, make some tutorial which will cover some steps. the only step for the tutorial can be a 1, right? Just, show some hint and player know how to play it. So the next trait is usability. This is also very important because of this massive scale. The games has to cater to a wide audience, and this audience doesn't have time, to just to watch, a video of your game, which will involve some gameplay trailer with, I don't know, 15 minutes or 10 minutes or something like this. Now, here you just have to sell your idea for the game in 15 seconds of the video. It's maximum, really. So, just by watching, for example, there is one thing, but even if just by watching video ad, so player watches video ad and he wants to download your game. So even before player will install your game, just by watching this video ad, he has to know how to play this game, how it works, what the challenge will be, and so on. So yeah, it's really also very, very important. And in order to do this, you have to have this game world that will be really simple to get to grasp, to understand for the player. And the third trait is, I think this is one that is most known. It's just that it has to be easy to play and hard to master. So, player has to just start playing this game just from this one hint, just from the start on, and he has already know how to, for example, move his character. And the controls have to be simple, but they have to be so powerful that player can master them, and do better and better in the game just by using these controls. This is like a holy grail, right? For controls, I think, in all of the games, not really in hyper casuals. So I also, when doing this talk, I just also thought about old games, because we have this nostalgia, right? That we somehow, remember from the childhood this great game, and we now we replay it, and it seems so cumbersome, right? Controls don't feel natural. It's just hard to play. Interface is too complex, and that sort of things. And this is why, because new games are trying to be simpler in trying to be simple to control, trying to have this interface that is almost invisible. And yeah, they try to have story that is more set in the world, not outside. So, try to build a better immersion. So this is this trend, but I think it's also about accessibility. And I think it's a really good trend. I mean, it just makes games better. And we also have bigger audience, right? So for example, let's take Thief as an example. This is the first one, and some I think the newest one. So as I did some research, in this new one, player that will play on PC will have just 16 keys, type of keys, right? 16 type of keys. But still is quite a lot, right? But it's kind of complex game. And in case of the old one, player had to memorize 35 keys. So whoa, I mean, crazy. And also when we look at the interface, we can see that on the first Thief, really don't know as a player what these shields do, right? And if each shield corresponds to, I don't know, one hit that I will get, or maybe it corresponds to some abstract number, we really don't know it as a player. Also, this thing in the middle is really strange. We don't know what it do. And when we compare this to the new one, we see that it's much more elegant, clean, and and also it's simple to understand, right? We know that this here counter will tell us that we have some 5 arrows, right? That is just a counter. We have progress bars, which will show us probably something about character, and it's much more easy to understand. Even if you wouldn't play a tutorial, you just start from this place, you will know how this works. Yeah. Okay, so we can think about during our game development, we will have problems and decisions to make in many dimensions, right, of our game. So I looked at them, and I will, and as my next slides will try to show you what are probably the most common problems in these dimensions that you can use accessibility for. So visual interfaces. Yeah, you should just stick with what works, right? So if player is already known to to pop-ups, to submenus, to some icons, progress bars, use it. So it's much better, right? So for example, when we will just go back to here, you will see that this is probably also a progress bar, but it's much more clear, much more better presented in this form than this one, which is really strange, right, for us right now. So it's much better just to focus on what works and just don't reinvent the wheel, because it really doesn't. It's not worth it. You're trying to make some innovate gameplay and not really to innovate interface. I think maybe it's the other way around. Maybe you want your game to be really distinctive, really great because of the user interface. But I think this is like not a lot cases for that. Yeah, and also don't make your game screen look like Excel spreadsheet. So when I was working on some browser games really a long time ago, we used percents for some statistics. It was a strategy game, and we were really astonished that players just think that when they see percents, they thought that it's much more complex game, but when percent weren't there, right? So it's probably just better to avoid it. Also, same goes, of course, to floats and things like this. Yeah, and there is also one important thing, and you can use it a lot. So when you're just trying to decide, for example, you're trying to decide what should be visible for the player when he's playing the game. Gameplay, right? Not some menus, but core gameplay. So what's there? So you just have to be really careful about it, so that you will just put on the screen from the UI the just important things, right? Just the things that the player needs, without any things that shouldn't be there, but aren't really useful for the player, because they will just take space, right? They will just irritate player. So you just have to think of yeah, you just have to value your objects based on the number of viable needs, right? So functions that provide for the player. And also you have to think about states of the game. So for example, if I'm shopping in some RPG game, I don't want, probably to some enemies kill me, right? So because it will be really a bad experience for the player. So if we think like this, then probably when I'm shopping in a shopping screen, I don't want to see my health points bar, and I don't want to see my mana bar and so on, right? So I think this is really important, because this way, if you think like this, if you will just get rid of obsoletes, you will get much more cleaner UI and much more and much more immersive gameplay experience for the player. Okay, just let me excuse you for a moment, because I'm just alone and my dog wants something.
Okay, no worries.
Sorry for that. Okay. So yeah, and also we should present information in the simplest form possible, right? So progress bars, icon language is really great, right? It's probably it's much better in most cases to use icons than to write some stats in text, right? Because icons can be really really easily recognized, and player can just learn them because because it's much more easy to get. So let's see some examples of UI gone wrong. So for example, I have Oblivion and Far Cry 3. And and for example, in Oblivion, we can say that it's a lot of wasted space, because this is exactly a shopping screen, right? I'm in the shop and I see this guy, this seller, but I don't know really why his avatar is so important to me to take more screen than items that I can buy, right? It's really a strange decision for me. And also it's much more important for me to see clearly what I can buy, stats. And this way, if it would be the other way around, if this could take more space, like for example here, this, or maybe even more, this information could be presented in much more accessible way, right? It's much more better way just to read. And also there is one other thing with this minimal design. Is that you have tabs here, as you can see, and this tab is just for things that I can buy. And I think this tab, or something of some of them, or just one of them, when you go to there, you will see how stats on your character changed when you just employed some of these items that you want to buy. So in order to see if what this item does for you, you have to select it here, then select a tab with your character, see what stats does it change, and then go back. And maybe you don't want it, maybe you want another item. It's crazy, right? Because it's really useless. It's just player has to take more action that is really needed just to see what's the cost of this item on his character. And also, as I said, why do we have here this stamina and this health bars and this compass? It's really useless in this game state, right? Because we just want to buy something. We don't want to involve in combat. We're not walking in the shopping screen, So I think it's a great example. And another one, maybe not so clear, is Far Cry 3. And yeah, we can see that we have this quite huge minimap here. And it's taking screen space in the place where player will concentrate the most on the game, right? Because this is a shooter and player will concentrate mostly on what's in front of him. So, I don't know why shouldn't we put this map in this place, right? Or in this place? Because this is like top of the game world, won't really interest players as much. And level design should also reflect it, right? Because player will focus on what's in front of his character, and just rarely, maybe sometimes, he would have to focus on something that is much higher. So it would be much better to put this minimap elsewhere. And there is also this thing with crafting. We have this hint, and it works like this, but whenever you have resources that you can craft something, hint will appear, but it's not really connected with what the player will see right now in the game world, right? It's something abstract to the player because of the game state in which he is right now. So it just takes away the immersive experience that the player can get. And in Far Cry 2, there was just no interface on the screen, so it was much better, much more immersive experience. So as we think about crafting, we can take a BioShock, for example, as great design, how we can remind a player during progression of the game to craft something, right? There were these craft stations, and it was really set in the game world. Player was really wanted to go there, and it was part of the game progression. And here in Far Cry 3 is just abstract, so it's really bad design. Yeah. Okay. Okay, I'm like in the middle of my slides, so I'll try to get maybe faster. Yeah, we have this core gameplay, and it is the most important thing really in your game, because this is the core will be the action that the player will take like most frequently in your game. So player will spend most of the time with the core, right? And player also starts the game with the core. So it has to be as accessible as it can be. And yeah, also don't reinvent the wheel, right? If you have base of your game, this core gameplay, but it's just a platform game, probably your game should control as any other platform game, in terms of movement, for example. So for example, think about this way: you will have really intuitive movement in your game. So then you can easily, for example, build on top of that and design some really cool combat mechanic, right? That will use these simple controls in some really original way. It's much better that way. Okay. Yeah. Okay, this is an important topic. That your controls should always work in favor of the players. So it's really a bad way to think about controls and about difficulty, for example, in your games. But you want to make your difficulty higher just because your controls will be more complex, more harder to grasp, right? This is really a wrong way. So you just have to also limit controls, and controls should feel natural. Like if you, for example, as a developer, you're playing this game like thousands of times, and you make mistakes because of the controls that you implemented. for sure player will don't know how to play this game. I mean, for sure he will do the same mistakes, and for sure those controls will just irritate him, make him angry, right? So you should just iterate on them and find a better way how to design your controls. And of course, this thing, I think it's just nothing to explain. Just you should get instant feedback, right? If player will, try to move his character right, you have to move character on the screen right, really, as fast as possible, right? It has to be instant feedback. Yeah, and another topic, tutorials, a really important one, because if you know, you want to teach your players how to play core gameplay, this core of the game, and your tutorial will won't serve its function. For example, after finishing this tutorial, player will don't know how to play. Then it's really a bad tutorial design, because if player will finish your tutorial, it means that he knows how to play it. So the tutorial level has to be designed like this, but only player that learned how to play the game will pass it, right? And also, if you teach your players some actions, and the actions, and the player will interpret the result of this action in the game world in different way than you intended, then during your in later stages of your game can be much more difficult for this player than it should be, because he really don't know how to use this really important action. And it happens a lot. We had it in I had it in a lot of games I was working on. So this is why it's important to test your tutorials. So you just give your game, to some guy on the street, or just use some platforms like Playtest Cloud, for example, and you just watch if he understands, right? If he plays the game like you want him to play. And also it's good to ask him. So your tester, right? So your tester will tell you, will describe you how, what he learned during this tutorial, because this way you can just see if you succeed, right? You also take into consideration that players don't like to read, and also for some skipping tutorials is just it's just an easy way to do, right? It's just something that we do almost as unconscious thing. So you just have to make sure that your tutorial is interesting, then it already plays, right? It has some fun in it, and yeah, it should be exciting. And also you should guide your players' attention. So if you're like explaining something, trying to show player how something works on screen. For example, let's say you want the player to jump above some obstacle, right? So in this case, you make your level design so that the most important thing, this obstacle, will be there almost without any distractions, or in the best case without any distractions, right? So the player can only see this obstacle and intuitively jump on top, above it, right? So yeah, so you should just be aware of it. I think this is a quite interesting thing about collisions in dexterity games, that you should favor the player, and it means that if you have some really fast runner game, you should take into consideration that as humans, we don't really perceive everything instantly, right? We have this perception lag. And so that, you just have to take it into consideration. And for example, it's when you have really fast game and you have some obstacles, you just have to make sure that the collisions on this obstacle is really smaller than its graphics, because otherwise, if it will match the graphics, or even in worse scenario, it will be bigger, the player will just feel unfair, right? Because for him, he didn't touch that obstacle, and yeah, it's probably true because he just didn't have this skilled perception, right? And we should just count for that. And it's also about some color blindness in match-3 games, for example. Uh, if we just have blocks which have to be matched by their color, and we just have only colors that you can see which type of block is it. For color blindness people, it will be a disaster. So you just have to, if you want to cater for wider audience, also for people with color blindness, you just have to make sure that each type of a block has its shape, or maybe it has some emblem icon. And you can see that it's done in Candy Crush Saga and games like that. Yeah. And I think it's also really interesting point of view that you can also look at the difficulty level through accessibility lenses. So wherever you're trying to develop your game into your to develop your just maybe prototype, right? Your core gameplay into a big game with a lot of levels and so on. You will for sure design game progression, right? So it means that what elements will be on each level. So for example, let's say that on tutorial I will play with this frog enemy, and on third level I will play with some flying enemy, and so on. And you just have to make sure that the player will understand, for example, how the frog works and how to fight with it. And not only that, you also have to make sure that player will have some time, so some levels, to just have fun with it, right? To be accustomed to this new thing on the levels, to this new enemy. So you just have to make sure that you provide some space for that. Yeah, and it's also because you want to make your game, for example, level. let's concentrate on levels. So you want to make your level difficult, but in a good way, right? So it would make some challenge for the player, but it won't be so so crazy challenge that player won't really finish it after playing for, I don't know, nth time. So you just have to take into consideration that as a game developer, as a game designer, you played your game many, like thousands of times. You have this thousands of hours of gameplay already, and your player won't have that experience. So if something seems hard for you, for the player it will be disaster. It will be like something that is impossible, right? So you just have to try to invent some ways for yourself to counter that bias that you have. So for example, I can share with you some two examples. In Inspire Blast, when we are testing our levels, we shoot balls with a way like this, but we alternate. First ball that we shot we will shoot with skill. So we will look, at the level and and choose the best spot for where we should shoot. And then the next one, the next ball, we shoot just randomly in some strange place, just without thinking, right? It's really important that we do it without thinking. And then again, right? Skill, not skill, skill, not skill, skill, not skill. And you play your game like this. So this way you can somehow simulate that your skill is much more is worse, right? And it's probably more similar to the player that will play your game. And it works really. Basically it works. And also you can inverse keyboard controls for yourself. You can maybe design for yourself some, I think it's inverse keyboard controls and things like this. And also you should test with game analytics if you have this possibility, and iterate on based on what you found, right? So for example, in Spire Blast, we strive for 50 to 60% of fail rate for regular levels. So if we have a level that has a drop of 80%, so it's crazy high. It's 20% too much or even 30% too much. So we have to rebalance it, so it will be easier for the player. And in this process, you just have to try to guess, try to make some informed decisions, about what to find out what difficulties really player can have on this level that you didn't foresee, and you have to to solve them for the player to make them less painful. Okay, I'm like on the final slide, and I have some also examples, so I think we're good. Yeah, and one other thing interesting about accessibility, then you can also use it when you're designing stories, like for storytelling. And yeah, it's about this that you just know that, for example, that in your game, this platform mechanic, this gameplay of platformer is much more important than communicating some story to the player, right? Some abstract story, really. So you just in this way you design tools to tell the story in a way they won't be disturbing to this core experience that you want a player to have. So a lot of cases, just less is better, right? So just you also think about this, that each tool that you want to use to tell the story will cost some development time. And so, it's probably better to have tools that will be reusable. So you don't want, just to have some, I don't know, some crazy cinematic experience for the player that you will just use only once in the game, because this is an example, like you can just waste your resources really easily, and it is stupid, really. Yeah, and story shouldn't fight with the gameplay, right? I can tell you that I was working on our game. Anomaly was on Earth, and when we finished this game, we had reviews coming, and the most the thing that I remember really well is that almost each interview was saying that the game is really great, but they don't really find that the story should be there, right? And we were just, trying to make this story as cool as possible, and as flawlessly for the player and so on. And from the reviews, we can see that the story wasn't important for the player, and they would feel that without story, the game would be actually better. So it's really a great lesson that I had. And Also, simple avatars are more accessible, so you can see when you will play some hyper casual games that they have avatars that are really abstract and really simple in some simple forms, really low polygraphics and not, as less details as you can get. And they are more, more easy to just identify with, more easy to look, right? And they just don't take away the experience that you want the player have. Yeah, and it also about this that you just have to identify your characters for the story, your events, main events for the story, and you just want to tell it element by element. You don't want to, so that the player will try to grasp, multiple events at once and multiple characters at once, because he will get lost. It's much more better, much more accessible to just, show like we did with game progression, right? Show this character, try to familiarize player with it, and then show another character, and and maybe show some events concerning them. And it's also important to test your story. And it's really, really important, and it's really easy to do, because you can always do some mockups, and and just show these mockups to your testers and ask them to describe the story, and also you can ask them if they really like the story or not, and what they would add, because many times players have like the best ideas, really. So it's just good to have their feedback. And also, it's many times you do it in the studio where you work in the company, right? So this is some kind of internal testing, right? Okay. So let's go to some examples. And maybe we'll have also some time for questions. I hope that it wasn't too much for you, that it was quite accessible. Okay.
Okay.
So yeah, I just have some examples just to show for the finish from what I identified during some titles that I worked. So, for example, Inspire Blast, you can see this game on some YouTubes, or you can also download it from App Store if you have Apple Arcade. And you can see there's still this problem, because it's not still solved. We are planning to solve it, and we have some ideas that it's still not solved. So we had when we were developing this game, we had these developer players that many we just there could be identified two groups of people. One group played this game in one way, and another group played in another way. And in this game, you just it's a game where it's a kind of like a match 3 in 3D space. It's like you have this tower, and you have blocks on it with different colors, and you just shoot those blocks. And because of its physical game, so the one thing of the game is that if you shoot right, you can collapse a lot of blocks, and they will just fall out. And also you have this matching, so you can match big group of blocks like in any match 3 game. And we had people who played to just topple blocks, and we had people who played they liked more matching. And we had this bias, right? This conflict, and we tried to connect towards of play. So we tried to make a scoring, so that it will reward each group of players. So player that will topple, blocks will be rewarded in the same way that the player who will match blocks. And of course, what it did is as already, I think even from the description of it, you can see that it's really not accessible scoring, because you have these two ways of play that are not really connected together too much. So we had system problems. We didn't know how, how that the system of scoring wasn't really clear for the players. We had balance problems, how to balance these two types of scoring so they will be, as rewarding as the other. So if you're thinking analyze looks like this, so you just have these two extremes, and you just try to somehow calculate something, and so if you have something like this, it's probably better to redesign your scoring, right? Especially if it's a casual game, because I'm 100% sure that the player won't know how the scoring work in your game and how to score better. It will just feel random to them. So this is one thing, one example. And we have another game, Robonauts. So yeah, in this game, originally we planned to have some kind of shop where you just could buy and upgrade your weapons and so on. But from what I found, and from the perspective and from the reviews, we found that it was a very good decision just to don't have it, and have a really original way to pick up weapons and have this weapon system work. So for example, here is just that if you destroy some enemy, you have chance that this enemy will drop some weapon, and you already have some weapons acquired, so you just can pick up a new weapon. If you pick up a new weapon and it's a shooting weapon, not some long range weapon like grenades, then it will just the old weapon will be I think, yeah, it will be just dropped out. So we'll just drop out an old weapon and get a new one. And it's a really fast-paced system, right? Really, along with this arcade dynamic shooting experience that we wanted the player to have. So if the player, would somehow, during the fight would have to open some kind of item shop or something. Then it would, take away this really dynamic experience. And this way, it's also simpler, right, and more accessible. Yeah, and another thing about Spiral Blast, we just for a long time we just had this UI interface without this one, without matter of the length of the tower. And yeah, and we lived with it, and when we finally added it, because we thought that, yeah, we just thought, and from the reviews also from the players, we got that they want to know how far is it to the end of the level, because they don't know if they will manage to do their objectives. So we introduced it, and we saw that after we added it, it's really, we just can't imagine playing without it. So it's also important. And as you see, it's not so visible. It's not so, it's kind of blurry. And this way, it also doesn't take away, experience for the players which really don't need it, right? Because it's too much for them. And the last example is from Crazy Kick. This is, I think, really clever way of showing the goal for the player. So on each level, there was just one goal, really. The player had to shoot the gate, the football gate, right? And we didn't show, as you see on these screens, we didn't show meters to the gate or something like this. We just did it like this, but the camera was always showing the goal. So, it was really, I think, clever way to do it. So the camera always had an angle, that was showing in the center the goal for the game. Okay. So now, if you have any questions, if you have time, I'm ready to answer it.
Okay, thank you very much, Artur. Yeah, we can still spend some time on questions. So it's after 1 p.m., but the next lecture will be at 2 p.m. I don't see any questions on our chat. So now my question to our participants, our attendees, do you have any questions to Artur? So maybe I will ask one question. So Artur, I know that you are not very experienced in the quantum computing domain, but maybe you have already encountered some, let's say, scientific games, right? So games aiming to popularize science.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. Do you maybe have some hints regarding such games, which usually because in such cases, usually the goal is to educate and to just simplify some usually relatively difficult concepts and then present them to the general audience in an accessible way. So that's why I'm just wondering if you have maybe an experience with that and may give some hints to our participants.
No, I played in the past one game. I don't know how it was called. I have like a bad. I don't really remember well names, but it was a game about doing some chemistry substances.
Okay.
I think I don't remember, but it was
Anyway.
present. Yeah, it was just presented with some tiles and more like a board game, as I remember. And it was really working well because of iconic design, of the tiles, and even if it was kind of complex as a puzzle game. Yeah, it used a lot of concepts, a lot of things that are already working in puzzle games. So I think it's just that you just have to identify what really core gameplay is that you're striving to achieve, and maybe this core gameplay, when you abstract it, right, it's much it can connect with some game experience that is already in the open, right?
Okay.
So for example, I think also cool way would be to look at hyper casual game Freeze, this 2048 game. I think you know it. It was a huge success, and it's a game about adding things up, right? So it's also kind of mathematical way
Okay.
game, and but it was done in a way that summing up, these numbers was really exciting for the player, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think you can just this is also
Okay.
a great example, and we
Nice.
don't have to go so complex, with
Okay. Good.
looking at.
Very interesting. And there's one question from Vatsal Kanoria on our chat. Was wondering about examples of games for screen readers, for example, for blind users or people with mobility difficulties, like pressing keys or moving a mouse, and what can
Mhm,
be made for this?
mhm. Uh, yeah, this is a really big challenge for a game designer to design a game that will work for blind people. Um, and I know that there are games like this, and they were also really successful for not only for the blind people. Mm, and there was a game where you just where you played just by you were trying to explore the space around you just by hearing sound. The sounds where you just heard the sounds, but you could somehow relate to the place in the world, the direction in the world from which you could hear the sounds.
Okay.
And yeah, and you just and I think it was based on some accelerometer, and it was really interesting take. There are also some games where you just try to share the experience of blind people, because players just want to experience a new kind of feelings, new kind of emotions, and new kind of ways of seeing the world, right? So also really cool to design a game where just show the player how you can perceive the world if you are blind people, right?
Okay, great. That's good. So maybe in the future we'll also have some human-machine interfaces, right? So if there are works, for example, by the company from Elon Musk, like Neuralink, just to connect the human brain directly to the computer. So maybe in the future there might be even such interfaces. We'll see. But anyway,
this is amazing.
yes. But anyway, for sure we'll have to wait for it a bit, probably. All right, I don't see any more questions on our chat, so I think that we can finish. So let me just stop recording.